Hello, welcome to this video on matters surrounding swimming pools and pool fencing issues, defects and other critical information that purchasers should know about swimming pools when purchasing a residential property, some legal aspects as well. My name is Ryan Craig. I'm a licensed building and timber pest inspector, and I've been doing this work for around 19 years now. I've got my own company, QC's Building Services, and I'm designing these videos to try and help people get more of a knowledge on critical issues for them that will help them minimise the risks of sustaining any financial loss as a purchaser when entering into contract negotiations to buy property. So basically we're going to try and achieve within this video to give some education on the laws that govern swimming pools and pool fencing, which have been significantly changed in more recent years. We'll cover a little bit about defects found within inspections carried out and how to handle them and costs associated. Some of them are very large for swimming pools. And any other information that purchasers should know about and be familiar with in relation to purchasing a property that has a swimming pool, simply because there is a tremendous cost potentially involved with some defects that if they don't handle properly, that's the purchaser, both legally, most importantly legally in terms of how they set the contract up, they'll be vulnerable to incurring costs. So best to know about these things and how to handle them and avoid the risks of sustaining loss. So let's start off with the issues in relation to the pool itself. The first thing to acknowledge is that the Australian standard for building inspections clearly excludes swimming pools, any equipment for swimming pools and any other associated equipment from a building inspection. So unfortunately the greater majority of inspection companies operating based on what I've seen, as I say, for the last 20 years of doing this work, will not comment on any matters relating to swimming pools, notwithstanding that they could potentially comment on something that was obvious and help the buyer, their client, and not sustain the risk of enduring loss. So the Australian standard excludes swimming pools, so therefore most inspection companies who in Brisbane do only adhere to the minimum requirements of the Australian standard will not comment in the area of swimming pools. So very important you find out when you're doing your research about which inspection company to use, will they only adhere to the Australian standard and give the minimum information, or are they going to exceed it and comment in areas that they don't have to, that are excluded from the Australian standard like we operate, and you're going to be in a far better position because they will talk about swimming pool matters. So that's the first thing to know, is that swimming pools and comments on swimming pools is excluded, but if you engage a good company, thorough company, you'll get one that does comment in those areas that are excluded, but they'll disclaim the comments made. But it's far better to have comments made than none at all, which is what the majority of inspection companies do. The way to deal about that, of course, is at your time when you ring around and ask, and the critical thing is, are they going to comment in those areas? Don't leave it out to just swimming pools, but there's air conditioning in it, there's a lot of other things. Familiarise yourself with what is excluded from a building inspection, but in this instance we're talking about swimming pools. So there's some quite obvious defects that could be noticeable by an inspection company, and we're forever pointing them out, that actually cost quite a lot of money. And a couple of examples would be cracking in the internal shell of the pools, and also surface deterioration of the internal in-ground swimming pools with the pebble text material or tiles and stuff like that. Any corrosion that's visible in the shell of a pool. The reason that, well, they're very visibly obvious to anyone looking at a pool, but the reason why that it should be commented on, and it's really tragic that it's not by a lot of companies who just exclude those comments on swimming pools, is because of the cost associated. Swimming pools, by nature of the fact they're an in-ground structure and they have a lot of water, they have to be drained completely and then the work done and then the pool refilled. So there's significant cost in that alone, but also the kind of work that is required for rectification in pools is sizable and can involve lots of costs, up to thousands, tens of, in some cases, depending on the size of the pool. So make sure you engage a company that will comment and give you observations in swimming pools, inspection company. It's, as I say, much better to receive information like that cracks and obvious defects so that you can act on that as a purchaser and be made aware of it. The other thing to remember is that not only will you have that information and be able to consider that as part of your due diligence for the property purchase, but it puts you in a far better stead legally, because the contract that's predominantly used for the purchase of a property is one that's designed by the REIQ, the governing body for real estate agents, and it only allows for a provision for a purchaser of a property to pull out of a contract from findings of a building and pest inspection with that information that's contained inside the report. So inspection companies that don't talk about swimming pools won't put any information in a building report. It gives you no legal opportunity to pull out, therefore, because of any defects found in relation to a swimming pool. So there's two-pronged benefit here for you by getting companies that do talk about pools. One, you're getting good information to make a more informed decision. Two, you're on a better legal foot to able to withdraw from a contract because it's actually contained in the building inspection report, which is a requirement of the contract that's signed for you to pull out as a purchaser in the event you're not satisfied with some of the findings from a building report. So don't ever act solely and entirely on a building inspection company giving you comments and observations about a swimming pool. It's fantastic to use a company that does that and can be extremely beneficial for visually obvious defects like cracks, corrosion, and surface deterioration. However, building inspection companies don't have the tests and the equipment and materials to actually test for things like subterranean leaks, which can cost a significant amount for pools, and other defects in relation to a pool that only a specialist pool company can do. So whilst it's positive and good to get information from an inspection company, never mistake that with information that you can rely solely on and act on, and that's going to give you all the information about a swimming pool and eliminate the risks of you sustaining any potentially devastating financial loss for defects that might be present at a pool. Only by engaging a specialist pool company, licensed if necessary, who do audits on the pool in a complete manner and thorough manner, can you get a determination on whether or not, or what the status of the pool is and what defects might be present, particularly any hidden subterranean ones that an inspection company wouldn't be able to. So in all cases, our recommendation would be for purchasers purchasing a property with a pool is to always arrange an independent, separate inspection from the building and pest inspection. Still ask for comments from the building and pest inspector, but arrange a pool inspection simply because of the costs associated with the rectification for concealed defects. The cost to arrange a pool inspection, a couple $100, not much, and it can potentially identify things that a building inspection won't, of thousands of dollars that weren't visually obvious to the inspector. So it's something that's really critical to do in all cases we would recommend. The most optimum situation you should be in as a purchaser is to always, before you complete the contract or fill out the contract for the purchase and sale of the property, is to add a clause in the contract stating that you are able to get an inspection of the pool by whoever you choose, licensed company, pool specialist, and then that the findings of that you're to be satisfied or not satisfied, and if there's anything that's revealed to you, you have the ability to pull out of the contract in the event significant defects are found without any penalty. It's not currently in the format of the contract as it's designed. You'd have to add that clause in, and it would need to be done before the vendor countersigns that's your offer. So that's the best situation you can be in legally as a purchaser, but often it doesn't happen like that because the contract is normally signed after an open home and purchasers aren't aware of this. So if it's not in the contract legally, it's difficult for you to act on information to pull out of a pool if you organise an independent inspection. But if it's in a building inspection report, then it gives you more legal ground to stand on to pull out if there's any comments made. The swimming pool, let's move on to swimming pool laws in relation to fencing. Basically, there's been some significant changes in recent years. All swimming pools in Queensland now have to be registered. There's no charge to register the pool. However, if you fail to register the pool, it can incur a fine, and it's policed by random spot checks in some cases. The principal pieces of legislation for pool fencing is the Building Act 1975 and also the Part 3.4 of the Queensland Development Code, which is a new standard that came into effect in 2010, defining all the legislation and requirements for pool fences, very thorough and detailed, and it replaced 11 previous individual components that were quite disjointed, so it became one document. New and existing pools have to comply with the Part 3.4 of the Queensland Development Code as of 2015 November. So it's gone and passed, but that's the date it came in and had to apply. Compliant pool fencing is mandatory for all portable pools, spa pools, or any body of water over 300 millimetres. That's the key criteria. Now, as silly as it is, you can have a little pool, like a goldfish pond in your block, and if that's over 300 millimetres, then that would require pool fencing according to the law. but you can go to places like Bellbarry and Anstead and have dams and open areas of water that children can access, there is no requirement to have any pool fencing, which doesn't seem logical really. However, 300 millimetres in depth is the guideline for where any requirement for compliant pool fencing is needed. In November 2015, law was enacted as part of the sale and lease of residential properties, where pool safety certificates must be obtained by a licensed pool safety inspector. In the case of properties that are not body corporate, every 2 years, or when a property is sold, and for a body corporate situation, it's got to be done every year. So more frequent for a body corporate situation, probably because of the legal risks exposed. So with swimming pool fences, there's a couple of things that can happen. One is the contract is subject to a pool inspection being done by a licensed pool safety inspector, and then the purchaser deciding to act on that information and request to negotiate with the vendor on getting it fixed, or proceeding themselves and taking on board the fact that the vendor is not going to do anything about what rectification must be required. So the first thing is there has to be a pool safety inspection carried out as part of the contract. If there's any issues found, the vendor doesn't have to fix it. You can ask of them as the purchaser to fix it. They can say no, and you can then proceed, or you could pull out of the contract. You have to act reasonably if that's the case, but there's provision for a purchaser to pull out of a contract if the swimming pool inspection is done and they're not happy with that. They just have to act satisfied and be reasonable about what they do. The other option that quite often agents and vendors implement is that they give a Form 36, which is a notice to the purchaser that they don't have a compliant pool safety or current pool safety certificate in place, which is required under law, and that the onus is on the purchaser to get that done within 3 months of buying the property after settlement. So legally it transfers onto the purchaser. That's never really an advisable situation to be in, because you could take on a property, buy a property as a purchaser and not be aware of significant work that needs to be done or money that needs to be sent to be compliant. But once you sign that Form 36 or agree to that condition, there's no responsibility on the vendor or seller of the property to get a pool safety certificate for you. It goes on to you as a purchaser. Pool safety inspectors need to be licensed with the Queensland Building and Construction Commission, and inspection companies can comment on, like we certainly do as well, and on the adequacy or not of pool fencing and compliance, because we've got knowledge in that area and it's very easy to look at in the Queensland Development Code, which is accessible to everyone. But if you're not licensed and hold a specific license to give pool safety compliance certificates, you're not allowed to give those certificates, and really you have to refer someone to those kinds of people for advice that can be relied on, even if you have good knowledge, which we do. But in our reports, we will still comment on pool fencing, but we're not able to issue any certificate compliances for pool fencing because we don't hold a license to do that particular kind of work. The legislation in place that I've mentioned before, there's a whole body of range of legislation, has the power to issue fines for any breaches of this pool fencing regulations and laws, both for pools and actually for the fencing. Mostly for the fencing the focus is on in recent times because of drownings. So just to summarise in relation to this issue, it's a very critical one for you to be aware of as a purchaser, that if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, you could run into major cost and financial loss through simply following the procedure that's there at the moment, which is signing a contract that is designed by the REIQ that doesn't give you any provision to do due diligence in relation to swimming pools, the structure and defects and those kind of things. It does for the pool fencing, but there are other issues in relation to swimming pools and defects that can cost thousands of dollars. They're one of the defects that can run into the highest cost to repair if there are defects present. And for that reason, we would always recommend that a purchaser never ever enters into a contract without there being a clause added by their conveyancing solicitor that gives clear ability for them to get an inspection done on the pool and the equipment by their contractor of choice, and that they're to be happy, reasonable and satisfied with those findings. And if they're not, then they have the ability to withdraw from the contract free from any penalty or cost, and that's legally binding in the contract because it's not there at the moment in the current contract. And if you sign it as it is, you'll have no legal rights. The The above listed inspection that I'm talking about, the inspection I just talked about in relation to the pool defects and identifying significant cost of pool defects is completely different to the secondary one, which is the pool fencing. That is mandatory and required and can be done in the two ways I said before. One is that there is a process that started during the purchase of the property, which is organised by the vendor and or purchaser, and then that is completed and there's an issuing of the pool safety certificate, or there is an issuing of a Form 36 as part of the contract filling out, and that's where the vendor says, I'm not interested in doing any pool fencing requirements and compliance. You are getting a Form 36 to say that you as the purchaser are taking responsibility for that to be done, and you have 3 months to do that from the moment you take settlement of the property. So that's the other option, okay? So basically, the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is also about companies that, if you don't engage an inspection company, just remember the importance of engaging an inspection company who exceed the Australian standards and are prepared to comment in the area of swimming pools, even though it's excluded from the building inspection standard, and notwithstanding they'll have to disclaim any comments they make, because it's far better to receive any information they can possibly give you about swimming pools because they have knowledge and they can see that there's potentially defects there which could cost you a lot of money than not receive that information, obviously. The other benefit, of course, is that if an inspection company does actually comment about swimming pools in their report, it triggers that ability for you to withdraw from a contract for potential defects about a swimming pool that are significant in cost, because that is what is required in the contract that is signed for the purchase and sale of the property. It says that a purchaser can get a building and pest inspection and 2 subsequent reports, and they're to be satisfied and act reasonably with the information in those reports. Therefore, if companies exclude things and you don't get that information in the report, there's no ability for you to move out legally. So it's really important for you to recognise this. That's why we say the best scenario is get a clause added at the start where you have got every legal right, but if you don't, then the next best thing is to get an inspection company that at least comments in the area, because it gives you some sort of legal standing to act on that information. Just remember, it's always a good thing to get an inspection company to comment on swimming pools, but by nature of the actual item itself, a swimming pool, there's many concealed areas that the inspector won't be able to test: plumbing, leaks, subterranean. So for that reason, you should always arrange an independent, suitably qualified and licensed pool inspection company to carry out an audit of the pool and all of its equipment, so that you can be fully advised of any and all potential defects, concealed and otherwise, about that are present with a swimming pool, and know the costs of these, so that prior to you going unconditional, you're fully aware and have been told of any ones that might be worth thousands of dollars that you could act on before going unconditional if you don't organise an independent inspection. The current laws in place have been very significantly added to and are very thorough now, and there is basically compliance when a property is sold for times, as I said before, every 2 years for a property that's not body corporate, and 1 year for a body corp property, for these pool fencing requirements to be reissued as part of the law. So hopefully that gives you some good information about swimming pools and how they can be relevant in building inspections, particularly with the laws, defects, costs, and how you should or could do things differently as a purchaser to make sure that you minimise the risks of any financial loss. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you are buying the property in the future, we'd love to help you out. Cheers.